Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Busy times in the cyclocross world, so also busy times for us talking about cyclocross, but after today there's 2 days of rest for us and the riders. But with me here today to talk about the Worldcup in Dendermonde is Issam.
Hello everybody.
As I just said, we'll be talking about the Worldcup in Dendermonde. It was the third round here of the World Cup out of 5 races. So really the classification is starting to shape up. It was Michael Vanthourenhout who was going into this race as leader of the World Cup. But how did the race go, Issam?
Well, before the race there was of course a little bit of discussion if the race would go ahead because there was a lot of wind, a lot of gusts of wind actually, with some actually reaching almost 100 kilometers. But at 12 o'clock they knew what was going to happen and the races would go on. In the men's race it was a very good start for Van der Poel. Van Aert was good as well. Toon showed his colors in the first lap. We saw actually a hiccup of Van Aert colliding, or not even colliding. The bikes of Van Aert and Van Kessel came together. They struggled a little bit to get them out of each other and then they went on. That was no real problem for Van Aert and he managed to get back in the front quite quickly. It was Hermans who was a little bit in front. Van der Poel who was there. Hermans actually tried to make a gap. Van der Poel followed pretty quickly. But Van Aert saw the danger and reacted also and came with them. And this is only lap 1. It was very slow, a lot of running, very muddy, and it was very slow racing, but it was entertaining, I have to say. Into lap 2, Van Aert decided that it was enough. He thought that the pace was too low and the group too big, and he tried to make a gap. The only one that was able to follow at that moment was Van der Poel. The others just, couldn't really follow it, and then we had a duel. At least that was what we were thinking. And in round 3, Van Aert was having enough of Van der Poel's company and tried to get rid of him, and it happened. The gap went from 6 to 10 to 12 to 15, 26. We were on 31 when lap 3 was on an ending, and at that moment we knew what was going to happen. Van Aert was going into the distance. Van der Poel never saw him back again, and the gap just kept growing and growing. What was then at that moment a little bit interesting was the battle for third, where the leader of the World Cup, actually, Vanthourenhout, was trying to get that third place. But Toon Aerts was having a very strong race, even going over the barriers, finding himself in the mud. But luckily enough, landing in the mud is not that hard to do. And Toon Aerts was really strong and got himself in that third place and didn't let it go. In the last lap, he was even a little bit considering thinking about second place, but Van der Poel held him off pretty strongly, and it was Toon Aerts that had to settle for third.
So this strong performance here by Wout van Aert, not really much we can say about it. It was just simply the best, and this season is beginning to look more and more like the 2017, 2018, maybe even a bit more like 2016, 2017 season. You can see that Van Aert on the faster parcourses is just a bit worse than Van der Poel, but on courses like this, he is just better. He simply can push the high wattages for a longer period of time. It kind of reminded me of the race in Bredene in 2017, where before the race there was a lot of talks about Van Aert being the favorite there as well. And ultimately, there it was after 1 or maybe 2 laps that he distanced himself from Van der Poel, just like he did here. There he won with 1 minute 30. Today the gap was a bit bigger, almost 3 minutes. So quite a big gap actually, but Van Aert really found a parcours here that suited him, the running, the high number of power that really benefited him here today. But you could also see that Van der Poel didn't have the motivation, because in the interview before the race he was already saying, I don't really like the parcours, it's nothing for me. So I think that also contributed to the fact that the gap was so big.
Yeah, it was the gap of course became really big after the mental aspect played a big role. Van Aert was not going to stop in any way, shape or form, and Van der Poel knew that after lap 3 the race was done, because 30 seconds in one lap, that's a pretty big gap. So from that moment there is nothing to do against this Van Aert. This Van Aert is going to be unbeatable. It reminded me a little bit as well on the World Championships we had in 2018 with Valkenburg. I think that really was also a race where Van der Poel and Van Aert, in the first 2 laps, I think, were pretty close to each other, and then Van Aert was like, okay, I can go a little bit faster, and Van der Poel just had no answer. And it's Valkenburg was, of course, a little bit more hilly, but there was also a lot of running in it, and I think the running part really just killed Van der Poel a bit.
I think so as well, because even though Van der Poel isn't the worst runner, he clearly isn't the best runner either. I mean, Van Aert runs super fast. If you look on the Strava, you can really see that the times he runs per kilometer those are serious times that he runs.
Yeah, that's true, and don't forget, in the history of Van Aert, before he was a cyclocrosser, he did also a lot of running because he was member of an athletic club in his hometown. So the guy really had been doing running from his youth ages. So he knows how to run. He's an athlete from his childhood, and that really helped him in this race. I think Van der Poel is not a bad runner at all, because you will not get a second place if you're a bad runner on this race. And he was just, he was in front of the likes of Toon Aerts and Vanthourenhout. So he did a really good job, but today there was just one guy that was above the rest.
In third place, we find Toon Aerts behind these two guys, and I think he did a really solid race. He isn't in the best form. He has slightly been injured because of the accident he had with the van on training. Third place here, in top shape. I think he could have beaten Van der Poel, but third, super solid. He paced himself well, starting relatively slow and then slowly but steadily overtaking riders, riding from group to group, and then in the end, ending third.
Yeah, Toon Aerts did had done a very smart race as well in Zolder, and I think today in Dendermonde it just showed that the guys that were a little bit smarter in Zolder, where we have said that if you think about both races and you want to do good in both races, you should not be using all your energy in the first race, because that will cost you in the second race. And Toon Aerts is really an example of one of those guys that did a smart race in general today, but also was yesterday pretty smart as well, and used his energy pretty well. And a very strong performance. And indeed, I think if Toon Aerts was on his 100%, I don't think he's far off, by the way, but if he was on his 100%, he could have threatened Van der Poel for second.
I think he misses a bit, and his team manager Sven Nys said that as well during the race interview. He said that Toon Aerts, because of that injury, was missing these few percentages that he could go just over his maximum, that he could go 105% for 5 minutes, and that's why he was going probably 95% for the entire race. That's what Sven Nys said, and I think you could really see that was true during this race.
Yeah, you could really see that, and such accident that he had and the injury that he had, that that's not something that will go away in 1 or 2 days. You will feel that, and especially if you will lose a little bit of training days, you will feel that in your shape. But it seems that he is getting over that now, and definitely a strong performance from Toon Aerts today.
Let's run down the entire top 10 then. Behind the podium of Van Aert, Van der Poel and the Aerts, we saw the leader of the World Cup, Michael Vanthourenhout, in front of Sveek, Van Kessel, Hermans, Ronhaar, Thijs Aerts and Gianni Vermeers. So first about the fourth place, Michael Vanthourenhout. He now lost his lead in the World Cup, but I don't think he rode a bad race. He really pushed himself to the maximum and he kept on fighting during the entire race.
Yeah, not a bad race indeed for Vanthourenhout. I think it could have been worse than that. In the end, just finishing fourth is... he lost his lead in the World Cups, but I think for now it's still alright. There is a lot to play for still, and he should definitely not be disappointed with his race. I still think though that his race of Zolder hampered him a little bit today, missing that extra, because I don't think that this is not a race that suits Vanthourenhout completely, but I think that he could have gone a little bit longer with Toon Aerts for sure.
Further down the top 10, we see a really impressive ride by Pim Ronhaar, just 19 years old, ending here in 8th position, the rider from Paul Sauze-Bingle. Under 23 rider as well, don't forget that. 8th place, really good job by him. He's super talented, and I think this really shows it.
Yeah, that's true. He struggled a little bit with some of the races, especially because you have to run with the lead riders. But today, I think it's his second top 10 of the season, and it's really good to have such a performance at such a hard parcours, because don't forget, this is really a really tough parcours.
It's even his first top 10 of the season. Before he got 5th at the European Championships and then Bos, but first top 10 of the season in such a hard race really shows that there is some big talent inside that guy. Of course, he came close to the top 10 with an 11th place in Boom and 14th in Gavere, but making that last step in the top 10 and then doing it in a World Cup, really impressive. And you could also say that Toon Aerts, he's usually also just outside of the top 10 and now ending 9th. Good job by him as well.
Yeah, also a good result from Toon Aerts, and those are also really guys that love the mud, love these kind of races. You can also say that from Vermeers. I think he might have wanted a little bit more than this, but he also liked the mud, and getting a top 10 is not that bad. And I think that the both Thurmans guys also did put in a pretty good show.
Well, they might like the mud, but you couldn't really say the same for Pidcock and Lars van der Haar today, both not finishing the race today. What was up with them?
I don't know. I think for Van der Haar it was mentally already very hard to get himself through the starting line, because in his interviews yesterday and today he just showed that he had zero interest in doing this race, and he's forced because of his classification. He tried it and he saw that there was nothing to do in this race, and when he was outside of the points he knew that it was enough, and he had enough of the race and he just stepped out. I think for Pidcock, that's a different story. I would say that maybe that race of yesterday, he did a lot of chasing after his mishaps in the first lap, where he had to come back. I don't know exactly what the reason was for today, that he dropped pretty quickly after lap 1. Yeah, definitely not a good result, and Pidcock is not really a guy that would DNF so fast.
Maybe he just had an off day in the beginning. He maybe blew himself up a bit as well, trying to close the gap after he had to start on the second row, and maybe that just contributed to the fact that he didn't have the greatest day. In combination with that, maybe his head just went down a bit, and it is a busy period of racing, so perhaps both Van der Haar and Pidcock thought, okay, let's drop out of the race, get into the camper, get warm, don't risk getting sick for 15th or 20th place, at least not the places where they want to end. They don't even end in the points around those places. I think for the UCI points they don't have to do it, so perhaps their focus shifted towards other races, because in 3 days time we are racing in Bredene, and on the 1st of January we're racing in Baal, 2nd of January Gullegem, 3rd of January Hulst. Busy time, so maybe it's not even the worst decision they made.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for Van der Haar, for sure, it's gonna be a good decision to make, especially if you didn't like the race in general. And he lost his 4th place in the classification though for Van der Haar, and I think Pidcock was 9th before entering this race. They both lost out quite a bit in this time of the year, this time of the season. You have to make those decisions, because all these races that are coming up, if you really go in the red in this race, and you really have to put in a lot of effort to make this race to a good end and to finish this race, it will cost you in the next following races.
Then the last thing that we're going to discuss here in the men's race is a group of riders ending just outside of the top 10. Ben Turner, Thomas Main, Curtis White and Kevin Kuhn. Not the riders from the Netherlands or Belgium. All 4 just outside of the top 10. All 4 not the oldest riders either. I think they did a good job here in finding a real cyclocross parkour.
Yeah, they did a good job indeed. I mean, they showed themselves pretty well. I think for White, we have seen him already a few times at the front starting, and also trying to be in the top 20. For Main, we know that he is a young talent, and the same goes for Turner. Those guys are also in their age and in their category, they are very good riders, and it's so hard to ride against those elite riders. And I think a very good job for both Turner and Main, and also for Kevin Kuhn.
Then we're going to talk about the women's race, where it was Denise Betsema who took the fastest start into the field, and Alvarado actually had a pretty bad start. She was in 11th position, almost 20 seconds down at some point in the first lap, but Betsema, she's quickly started to fade from the front. A couple of mistakes, including getting stuck in a deep puddle of mud. She fell in there with her knee, struggled to get out, and that opened the gap for Lucinda Brandt, the leader of the World Cup. She opened the gap, and she actually already looked to be cruising to another victory. victory, but from the background it was Alvarado who came steaming to the front, closed the gap to Brandt, and for a time we were on with 2 leaders until Lucinda Brandt, I think she made a mistake and Alvarado was able to open a gap of 15 seconds. So at that point we were all thinking, oh, Alvarado, impressive stuff here, going to win the race. But it was Lucinda Brandt who, after a bike change where she let some her tire pressure drop, she started closing the gap to Alvarado and she actually overtook Alvarado. Alvarado then started making mistakes and lost connection with Brandt, where it was Brandt and eventually who actually went on to win the race. But behind her it was Alvarado who had got company from Clara Honsinger, and Alvarado eventually needed to let Honsinger go as well. So Honsinger ended second in front of Alvarado, who got third. Lucinda Brandt here making it 3 out of 3 in the World Cup. What can we say about the race? Because personally, the situation with Alvarado reminded me a bit of the Belgian Championships men's race in Kruijbeke.
Yeah, it did remind us a little bit about that when Van Aert missed his start a little bit, tried to make up for that, overtook everybody, was looking to win that championships, and then Toon Aerts came back and eventually won that race. I think Brandt kept her head cool and knew what was going on. She didn't panic at all, and she just knew, okay, Alvarado is now gone, but the gap is still reasonable and I can still close it down. And Alvarado just maybe a little bit too fast in the midway through the race.
So Alvarado, I think you're right, she might have blown up, and you could say the same for Teammate Betsema, who was leading halfway through the first lap, falling down to 8th, and it's pretty easy to blow up on a parkour like this. And I mean, it's hard to compare the parcourses between the men's and the women's race, because the men needed to walk more, because the women, they broke the parkour, they made it more and more muddy. And I mean, it's hard to say what's easier, running or riding, but either way, it's super hard. But they needed to push the pedals longer and longer, and if you're running, you have some sort of different type of exercise that you're doing, so maybe it could benefit you. I'm not too sure in that, but it definitely wasn't the easiest race, and if you blow up, you're falling back very far.
Yeah, the problem with these kind of races is when you are, when you have to cycle and then you have to run and then you have to cycle again. The problem is that your legs can lactate if you are pushing yourself too much in both the running or in the cycling. So I think what you really want to do is you want to try to put yourself in a position where you don't push it too far. You want to be like on 95% of your abilities to save those legs, because if you blow up at such a parkour, you cannot run and you cannot cycle because you're just done. There is nothing in the legs, and I think that was a little bit the case for Alvarado, because she had nothing left to defend herself from Honsinger.
Yeah, either way, it's both hard, the running and the walking, but I mean, it's hard to compare. I think it's also very personal. Some riders will prefer the combination of running and riding, whilst others will prefer to have longer running sections or longer cycling sections than hopping on and off the bike. But I mean, it was a really brutal race, and Clara Honsinger did a good job to end second. I mean, she kind of rode a similar race to Toon Aerts, where she didn't start too crazy and then eventually started picking up riders left, right and center.
Yeah, it's becoming a little bit the Honsinger start, because it's not the first time we have seen her doing this, and we already said that for today she could have been the woman to be on the podium, and I'm very happy that she did so, even second place. Very good performance from her, and she did a very smart job in the race. She tried to manage that race pretty well, didn't lose that much energy in the first few laps. I was thinking that maybe she lost out to too much, but she came back very strongly and even managing to get second place.
Let's walk down the entire top 10 behind Brandt, Honsinger and Alvarado. It was a really impressive ride by Fem van Empel to end 4th in front of Annemarie Worst and Sanne Kant. Then we see the leader of the under-23s, Cata Blanca Vaz, in front of Denise Betsema. And then rounding off the top 10 are 2 riders from Credit Shop Friestads, Manon Bakker and Yara Kastelein. I already mentioned it, Fem van Empel in 4th place, but we need to talk about it a bit more because she rode a really strong race. Just like Honsinger, she picked up a lot of riders, and to end 4th here as 18 years old, first year under 23, really impressive.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very strong race from her, and this season so far she has been very strong. She started very strong actually, then she went a little bit off. And then just came back again, and now with the 4th place is her best result this season. at such a parkour, and she didn't finish far off. It was, I think, only 40 seconds, which was between her and Brandt. And we know how strong Brandt is, and to finish only 40 seconds behind on such a parkour, I think that's a very, very strong performance.
She ended in front of Worst, who rode a solid race, and Sanne Kant in 6th. I think 6th doesn't really represent the race she rid. For a long time she was in the battle for a podium, and I think on a parkour like this, Sanne Kant can never be counted out for a good result.
Yeah, true. We have seen it already this season that when it's really fast, Kant is not really on her best. But the moment we see the mud, the moment it's becoming very hard, Kant really comes alive. And today she really showed that she is still top 10 worthy and even top 5 worthy. It's a shame though that she couldn't fight for that podium. I really would have loved to see her on the podium, to be honest. She had a very hard season so far. But you know, she did a really good job and she showed herself pretty well.
Of course, all the riders here in the top 10 did a good job, but there were some more riders just outside of the top 10 that may be slightly disappointed. Vos in 14th. But on the other hand, I don't really want to... You can't really take this race as a okay, yeah, you didn't perform here, so your season is bad, you won't do anything in the remainder of the season, because this is really an atypical parkour. You don't see races as muddy as this that often anymore, and certainly not on a parkour like this. So I've seen people already writing off Vos for the season, and I think that's unfair.
Yeah, that's a little bit ridiculous, I would say. I think such a race it's atypical, like you said, and even the riders and racers themselves, they said it already. You know, a lot of people said it already in their interviews that they don't think it's really part of cyclocross. Some say that they really love it. You know, the opinions are a little bit out of each other. But I think that, you know, such a race is not really cyclocross representable for a season in a whole. You don't have that many races in a season. You get maybe in the nostalgia you get a little bit more, and like 5-10 years ago you had like 3, 4, 5, 6 races that were really this hard. The last few years we have really fast races, and races, you know, we start already pretty early in the season, in almost not in the summer, but very late. I think that you cannot base one race, and especially this race, and say, okay, this is not going to be her season. Vos showed herself in Essen, and I think that Vos is going to show herself more in several other races.
I agree, because Anna Kay, she ended in 30th place, and who was down there with her? Laura Verdonschot 29th, Rochette 27th, Puk Pieterse 23rd. I mean, this is just not representative for the entire season. This result, you can't pin their season up on this, because this is a hard course, like we said, atypical. Some of them raced yesterday. I mean, you really need to be absolutely zen when you start this race, and you don't have any time to warm up, because you need to be there from the beginning, because if you have one bad lap, you can already be 40 seconds down. Then the last thing here is maybe a bit of an honorable mention. Katie Compton, she ended 25th here, but that isn't representative for the race she rid as well. At some point she was actually close to being at the back end of the top 10 until she got stuck in the mud for a solid 25 seconds or something like that, and that really cost her race. And I mean, it's good that they took out that part of the parkour for the men's race, because that could have gone really nasty.
Yeah, it was a good decision by the organization to take it off, because there were a lot of women who were struggling there. They got really stuck. Even Alvarado was stuck at some point, but got herself loose again. And I think that the organization did well to anticipate on that for the men's race and just get it off.
Yeah, you don't need to be looking for injuries, because that's also what organizer Jurgen Mettepenning has said, that he was afraid that if the men were going to go over there and they were running faster but got stuck, that they could get a nasty injury to their knee. And I think Jurgen Mettepenning made the best decision there, and all props to him, because he did everything he could to let this race go through, and in the end he made the right decision.
Yeah, definitely. And we have to say this is a race we're going to see at least for 5 years. They have a contract for 5 years now with the city Dendermonde, and also with the World Cup. So we're going to see this race for at least 5 years, and if it's not going to rain that much, it's going to be a whole different race. I think it's very flat, actually. If the bridge was in there, which they have removed because of the wind, it would have been a very, very fast, flat race. So I think that it was a very strong performance.
Then I'll just give the standings before we round off this episode. Lucinda Brandt leads Alvarado by 43 points. So remember, 40 points for the winner. Next race in Hulst, if she scores 3 points less than Alvarado, then she wins the World Cup already with 1 race to go. So that's going to be interesting, to say the least. She could skip Overijse then and fully focus on the World Championships. But we'll see that in Hulst, which is next week. But before that, on the 30th of December, there's more cyclocross, the ETIAS Cross in Bredene, which we'll be discussing then. Issam, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for hosting.
And with that said, we're going to round off this episode. Thank you for listening, everyone. Make sure to share this podcast with all your cyclocross friends, and then I will see you guys for the next podcast about the ETIAS Cross in Bredene. Goodbye.